Welcome, everyone, to the May meeting of the North Carolina Native Plant Society Southern Piedmont Chapter. We are so grateful you're here with us today. It's a beautiful day outside, and to be with us today is just a wonderful gift. My name is Beth Davis, and I'm the co-chair of the Southern Piedmont Chapter along with Lisa Tompkins. And we're excited about today's meeting. We want to first thank the staff at UNC Charlotte Botanical Garden for co-hosting this event with us. We're grateful to them for providing this opportunity to share our meetings with a large group of people. And we want to acknowledge that today we have Mary Duke as a guest host, and we thank you, Mary, for your efforts in making this program possible today. We welcome our speakers today, Brett Dupree and Patrick George. Patrick George is the owner and founder of Heartwood Tree and a local arborist company in Charlotte. And Patrick will probably tell us more about his story, but as an introduction, we can share that he realized he wanted to be an arborist who cared for trees, not harvested them. He founded Heartwood Tree in 1979, and if you can do the math, that's been about 42 years ago. Back in 2009, he could see how the canopy in Charlotte was declining, and he started the Queen's Crown to help identify trees around Charlotte and help people identify and celebrate those trees individually. That later developed into Trees Charlotte, which is an organization dedicated to regrowing the canopy in Charlotte. Brett Dupree also professes to be a lifelong tree lover and has traveled the U.S. admiring the West Coast redwoods and our own local treasures in the North Carolina mountains. During those travels, he noticed several treasure tree tags on some of the trees and began a self-taught journey to celebrate Charlotte's treasure trees. I think we can safely say that Brett is the epitome of a citizen scientist, and we're looking forward to hearing both of their stories today. Brett and Patrick, thank you both for joining us, and we turn the meeting over to you.
Thanks, Beth.
Thank you. Yeah, so, and I was not the precursor to Trees Charlotte. Queen's Crown was not. That was we existed alongside each other. Trees Charlotte was brought about by quite a few civil activists that recognize what characterizes what being in Charlotte is all about and how much we were losing the canopy. And they started a tree planting effort back around that time as well. So we both came along about the same time. The Queen's Crown is more a recognition of these, what I call jewels of the crown. Our canopy is our crown for this city. And my goal with the Queen's Crown was to recognize individual trees that have been part of it and are the, pardon me, they are the true symbol of what the canopy of Charlotte's all about. There's these individual trees sprinkled here and there all over. We have our forest in Myers Park and Dilworth that were planted for purpose back in the 1900s, early 1900s, first 20 years of the 1900s. And it's just celebrated. It is the definition of being in Charlotte, is going down like Queens Road West. So the city had tree planting programs for years. There was foresightful people back at the beginning of the previous century that turned these cotton fields into the forest that we live in now. And those programs were dropped in the early 60s. Liability became more of an issue and the city changed focus until 10 years ago when we realized what we've lost and what we can regain. And the whole thing is really more a matter of a call to recognition of the efforts of the past, and they're manifest in these treasure trees that we're going to talk about today. And hopefully that will inspire each of you to go and plant a tree and be inspired again 10 years later when you see what you've wrought. So It's a beautiful thing. The Treasure Tree program started in the early 80s. Tom Martin, Joe McLaurin, and Bill Logan saw virtually the same thing ahead of what we saw and started this the objective of awareness and appreciation of our county's urban forest. So it was bigger than the city. Find and recognize unique trees, reduce removal and damage, educate owners to the value they had that they were actually living with. And the criteria was a program master species list, species demonstrating longevity in our area, like the willow oak, total points equal more than 80% of an NC state champion, no problem. And then the three largest species in the county, and they eventually recognized 123 trees in that program. We're no longer just about the size of the trees. It is trees that have cultural history for Charlotte, trees that speak to people through the way that they've survived or they've grown, et cetera. The original volunteer committee, Tom Martin, Joe McLaurin, and Dr. Bill Logan. Charlie Williams, I'm not familiar with him, but he's obviously he may have done the biography of Michaud, I'm not sure. Maggie Barker, who was a teacher in the Montessori Park Road School. Don Booth, who's her husband, entomologist with Bartlett for years. And they had a nomination and recognition process. Committee visited, measured, photographed, programmed trees, and homeowners were presented with a document that they could hang in their home, that they could get some pride and maybe feel some obligation to take care of the trees. And new trees were added to a database and spreadsheet over time. The regular health checks, that's in the literature. I never saw a program enacted, but I know that Tom would visit trees upon request and check them out and make recommendations. Tom Martin was actually, back in the 80s in particular, he was the arborist version of Google. You couldn't just type into your keyboard. You had to go down and visit them at the Mecklenburg Extension Service, but Tom was the man that you went to for anything you needed to learn about trees locally and what problems you might have. Queen's Crown, that myself and Patrick Anderson started back in 2008, 2009, was just, we'd seen the Treasure Tree program had just dropped into obscurity because it was a volunteer program. And we felt like we needed people to get inspired to plant. You needed to see what happens because of your plantings. And the tree that you see right there, this giant yellow poplar at Winghaven, over 6 feet in diameter, and it's got a hole at the bottom of it that you can crawl into and look up 18 feet. You can stand inside the tree. And there's been, I think, 12 people in there at one time, or 12 children. I think that's the case. Amazing tree. That's the kind of thing that we want to have people have the opportunity to find the inspiration that you get and the humbling that you get when you stand next to or even inside a tree like that and recognize how small we are, how old the world is around us, and how fortunate we are to be where we are. And we started redoing the Treasure Tree program, and thank God, Tree Charlotte, with their backing and opportunity, has stepped in and upped the effort, and it's led us to where we are now. That's how they brought us. Brett was interested in finding these treasure trees, and he is the tree hunter. He grabbed the list of trees we had and made it his personal mission to go out and visit every single one of them. And sadly, he's found almost half of them no longer exist. But let's hear from Brett upon his adventures and what's happened with that.
Yeah, so once I started working with Patrick's committee and trying to track down some of these trees, we found out a lot of really great information about the list of trees. From that list of 123 original trees, there were at one point in either in the 80s or the 90s, we had 25 state champions. There's an Osage orange that's out near Reedy Creek Park. It was a massive tree. It burned in a July 4th fire from fireworks. It burned for almost 14 hours because the Osage orange is such a dense wood that some of the fireworks got stuck in the trunk, and it took them almost 14 hours to extinguish the fire in that tree. There's a black oak that was a state champion that they took out to widen one of the roads in Charlotte. We have a couple of Bur Oaks that are still both standing here that were in the original list that are just massive trees. There's a sawtooth oak that was a state champion. UNCC still has a chinkapin oak that at one time was also a state champion. American hornbeam has been removed since. And Bartlett Arboretum out there has one of the biggest Leyland cypress I've ever seen. It was apparently one of the first ones planted anywhere in this area. And on that original list, at one point, was one national champion willow oak. And there's a picture of it here on the bottom right. And you can see the owner sort of stand there in front of the trunk, and gives you kind of a perspective of how big that tree was, because its circumference was 27 feet around the trunk at 4.5 feet from ground level. 127 feet tall. The average crown spread was 113 feet, going north, south, east, and west under the crown. And it was total points for this tree was 480 points. And at the point where the committee nominated it for a national champion and it was recognized as a national champion, within a short period of time after that, the owner decided they want to cut the tree down. One of the limbs fell near one of the structures on the property, and they got scared that it was going to cause more damage, so they brought a crew in and took that tree out literally within a few weeks after it being named as a national champion. So part of this process that I went through for like about the last 2 years, was to try to find all these 123 original trees. So I got lucky enough to really get in touch with Tom Martin. I met with him a couple of times. He handed me a big trove of materials. Most of it was on a USB thumb drive. So that fortunately had the original list from a scanned PDF document of all the original trees. It also had all the original measurements, a bunch of original photographs, and he gave me a huge box of the unused metal tree tag stamps, and a really cool display that Joe McLaren handmade out of some materials that he collected. So from 2019 up to the present, I kind of picked up with Patrick from the efforts that the Queen's Crown had gone through to try and recognize some of these trees again. And Mary Probst works for the city now as an arborist. At the time, worked for Patrick at Heartwood Tree Service. She did a lot of work to consolidate the original list, created a Google sheet for us to start tracking the ones we found, whether we found them or not, or if they've been cut down or if they're deceased. And then I did a lot of property record research. One of the best tools that I used was Google Earth historical imagery. So if I had an idea if I had mediocre notes on where the original tree was that hasn't been found yet, I could go through historical imagery and see if there was a large tree crown 20 years ago, and then I could move through the years of aerial imagery and see if the tree disappeared at some point along the way. Also did a lot of knocking on doors. I did a lot of bushwhacking in woods in areas where some of the notes led me to, and I was lucky enough to work with Chris Chow, who was a student at Davidson College. Chris was a 2020 summer intern at Tree Charlotte. So Chris and I would mask up during COVID and go out on the weekends and try to track down some of these trees. So at this point, we were pretty lucky that we've been able to verify one way or the other 121 of the original 123 trees. And like Patrick said earlier, 61 of them are still standing, and 60 of them we confirmed that have been cut down or have died. So one of the things that I had to do, I didn't have any experience in this, so I had to learn all these processes by which you go about measuring trees. And luckily, there is one nationally adopted system to calculate a tree's points value, and that determines like the state champions and the national champions. So You basically measure the circumference of the trunk in inches, 4.5 feet from ground level of the trunk. You measure the height, and there's a couple of different ways of doing that. And then you measure the average crown spread in feet. Some of those techniques, it's pretty simple. Just get a tape measure to measure the circumference of a trunk. As far as the height goes, I took the easy but more expensive way of buying one of those Nikon Forestry Pros up there on the top right. It's called a hypsometer. It allows you to shoot a laser at the top of the tree and the base of the tree, and it triangulates and tells you how many feet high the tree is. It's one of the most accurate ways you can do it. And then you can also get a clinometer there on the middle photo. Is really more the way that forestry people, and arborists use that tool, where you basically have to measure 66 feet away from the trunk of the tree, and you use an eyesight on it, and it tells you how tall the tree is. And there are a couple of champion tree registries. There is a national one that's maintained by American Forest, nonprofit organization. And the state of North Carolina has its own state champion tree database that's managed by the North Carolina Forest Service. And that total points calculation is basically the circumference in inches plus the height plus 25% of the average crown spread. And that gives you your tree total points calculation. So I'm going to kind of talk about a couple of the trees in the original program and some stories behind how I track these trees down. And some of these trees have good endings and some have bad endings. And this is one of the trees that doesn't have a happy ending because it's no longer standing. And all that we had to go on from this one, from the original notes, is that it was on Shopton Road West, half a mile north of the intersection with Highway 49. And then it was on the eastern edge of a depression bog, and it said 800 feet southeast of the Field Bog Junction. So this is near McDowell Nature Preserve, so I thought it might be there. I used Google Maps to do the ruler feature to kind of pin a point there off of Shopton Road West on a map. I looked at historical imagery. And when I did that, I found that the field that they referred to no longer exists. It's a forest now. So, in 1994, there was an open field there that led into this wooded area around this bog. Well, now it's completely overgrown with trees and brush and everything. So that led me into a couple of bushwhacks into those woods. And about the third time I went in there, I found the bog, but I still hadn't found the tree. And then Michael Falero from WFAE got in touch with me and wanted to do a story on this. And he went out with me on the next bushwhack, and he was recording the interview with me as we hiked through the woods, and then went across Shopton Road West into that area. And we literally walked right into the tree. And that picture on the right is a picture of the tree that still had the original tag sitting on the tree. And the interesting thing about the Overcup Oak, I'm still a novice, so I learn every time I go out. I read things. So the acorn of the Overcup Oak covers almost 3/4 the nut, and they're mostly found naturally growing around wetland areas. So this tree basically evolved to produce a seed with a cap around the nut that could float in a bog and slowly germinate and grow other seedlings around the big trees. And it is a member of the white oak family. So this is just to give you an idea of how I went about some of my research. This is the Google historical imagery from 2002. So this is a 20-year-old aerial imagery shot. And, this is Shopton Road West running north and south here. So I put some markers on the road based on those notes and tried to draw a line, southeast from the road, and thought that the tree was over here on the right side. And turned out that it really meant that it was on the west side. Somebody probably had a typo in those notes. So I ended up finding the tree over on the west side. And you can see this photo on the top right here. This is a beautiful wetlands bog. And I should say it was a beautiful wetlands bog because they've developed this entire area now. They staked off the bog to probably keep from developing in there, but they ended up cutting about 20 feet into the bog, and they just pushed this Overcup Oak down with some heavy machinery. This is a good story here. This is a Bur Oak that is over off of Sunset Road that was saved from cutting down by the original committee. When they went out there in 1991, they were developing the property to build a Denny's restaurant there, and they were able to get this tree added to the Treasure Tree program in the early 90s, and it was recognized as a state co-champion in 1991. And there was an old farm there, and I remember Tom Martin telling me that the trough where they fed the livestock with they had a water trough used to sit right underneath this tree, so it was frequently getting both fertilized and watered at the same time from the livestock on this farm. So this tree, what's really interesting to see is, we have the original measurements from all these trees, and then I've gone out and taken new measurements. And what I'm finding is for most trees that are still standing like this, they've increased in size in almost every one of these categories by about 25 to 30%. So you can see how this tree in 1991, it was 138 inches in circumference, and now it's nearly 200. And so this picture on the right is a picture of my wife right underneath the trunk of it. And you can see how beautiful the spread and buttressing of the bottom of the Bur Oak gets when they get as big as this one is. And here's a wider shot of the tree to show you how big this canopy is. And what's really, really cool about the Bur Oak is the size of this acorn. It's the largest acorn of any North American oak. And just a couple of weeks ago, months ago, I nominated this tree for a new state champion because it had been surpassed since it was originally a state champion. And the North Carolina Forest Service just notified me that this is now the state champion Bur Oak. And you can easily go over there off of Sunset Road and park in the Denny's parking lot, and it's 25 feet away from you. This is a fantastic tree. Another good one is over off of McAlpine Creek Park. And the notes for this one and another tree were very, very hard to follow. It basically just said that it was along a path on the opposite side of McAlpine Creek from the Greenway Trail. So this was a true bushwhack. Mary Probst and I went out there back in April of 2020, and we sort of stumbled onto an old developed trail in the woods on that other side of the creek. And it's a really marshy, pretty much a wetlands over there on that side of the creek, which is very favorable to cottonwoods. One of the things I've definitely learned is that if you're anywhere near wetlands or marshy areas, you're almost certainly going to see cottonwoods in this part of North Carolina. And found the tree. The tree was almost 17 feet in circumference around the trunk. Just fantastic large tree. And the way that I was able to find this tree really to make sure it was the right tree, as you can see in this old photo with Bill Logan's wife, how this tree looks like it has two large feet at the bottom of it. So when Mary and I went out there to find it, I could see in this photo on the left that Mary took that it has these two big feet right in the front of it. And you can always tell you're spot on with the right tree when you find it. This one doesn't have the tag on it, but you can tell by the measurements that if you just increase the size of the tree about 20%, you figure this is the right tree. And at the same time we were on this trail, there was a box elder that was on the original list that we were able to track down too. And it had, box elder had fallen. They grow right on the top of creek banks. If you're around any of these, Sugar Creek, McAlpine Creek, you'll almost always find box elder sitting at the top of the creek banks. And this one unfortunately died probably in a storm at some point, knocked it down because it's really sandy, marshy, kind of wet soil up there at the top of the creek bank that took this tree down. And Mary is a big plant fan, so when we were out in this area on this trail, we found a couple of really interesting plants that she pointed out, and she was taking some great photos of these. We found a lot of mayapple; those grow in a lot of the woods around here. We found a sensitive fern, and she was really kind of excited to find the annual honesty out there. Some of the other trees in the original program, we have a lot of deodar cedar and ginkgo in this area. And, those are both not native trees to our area. And, I always kind of joke with people about the ginkgo is that I don't know how you can look at that tree and say that it's not native, because they've been able to find fossilized specimens of the ginkgo all around the world that are over 200 million years old. But the way they look at trees, that foresters look at trees and arborists, is that it's been introduced to this area. It didn't grow here naturally, because they almost were completely wiped off the face of the earth. If it wasn't for some Buddhist monks in Asia saved the ginkgo from just being disappeared from the face of the earth. And now we have ginkgos all over Charlotte, and they're really well adapted to this area. And I know that everybody's seeing a lot of deodar cedars around this area. Those are some extremely well adapted trees to this area. And it's funny that they would adapt so well to this kind of environment, because they're native to the Himalayas. We did have a couple of invasive species in the original list, the Chinese parasol tree and mimosa. Chinese parasol trees are really pretty trees, but they just spread like wildfire. Those are not really good trees to have around. As beautiful as they are, they're just not a great tree to have around. And the mimosa, mimosas are really interesting trees, especially scientifically, to study the way that they can react to things, how they close up at night. They close up their fern leaves at night, like they go to sleep, and they wake up when the sun comes up and open their leaves back up like a solar array. Some of the unusual non-native trees on the original list, there's a Crimean linden over at the Queen's University campus. Tom Martin actually had to send samples of that off to North Carolina State to really identify what type of tree it was, because it was really kind of hard to figure that one out. Then we have Japanese Zelkova, that's a state champion. There's a Japanese red pine, beautiful Japanese red pine. Japanese pagoda tree over near Moorcroft. And interestingly enough, we have a lot of dawn redwoods around here. We have a lot of really big ones around here too. And it seems to be a very popular tree to plant around here now, because it does two things. It grows extremely fast, and it's one of the only 3 deciduous conifer trees that there are. You have the bald cypress, the dawn redwood, and I believe it's the larch are the 3 that are deciduous conifers. And then there are a couple of coast redwoods that grow around here as well, and some of those specimens are just spectacular. There's one over near Charlotte Country Club that's just a beautiful, beautiful example of a coast redwood, extremely healthy. And one of the things that I kind of did a little bit of reading preparing for this, it's kind of interesting how many of these Japanese species trees we have around here. And it just so happens that Japan and North Carolina are almost on the exact same latitude of 35, 36 degrees north. So that may tell you a lot about, why certain trees that are native to other parts of Asia do really well in adapting to our environment here. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Patrick here, and Patrick's going to talk about our new committee and what we're doing now.
Thanks, Brett. Yeah, our new Treasure Tree Committee, about 2 years ago, we had a booth at the Tree Charlotte Annual Summit and encouraged people to sign up to get involved with us to discover these trees. Brett was one of those people. My daughter, Julia, who is training to take over my business, is one of those people as well. Jen Rothacker, who's on the board and one of the community engagement officer at Tree Charlotte. So she's the one reaching out and helping us find our feet. Mary Probst, who used to work with Heartwood, is tree canopy program manager, City of Charlotte. Patrick Anderson lives in Shelby now, but still in Charlotte a lot. He's an arborologist, which he's a tree lover. He works for a company that provides tree supplies for people like us. Lori Reed Dukes, who is not only with the City of Charlotte, she is now the city arborist. And that's she's a really committed person. It's a really great step for the City of Charlotte to have someone like her in that place. Mike Orell, who's grown up here. His parents were clients of mine 40 years ago. And he understands the beautiful city that he lives in and the trees that populate it, and is a wealth of knowledge about individual trees in the Myers Park Dilworth area in particular. Linda Nelson, who was a student and a volunteer, Chris Chow, who was um, the intern that we got through Tree Charlotte, put together the website, got all our information up there to make it accessible. Thank God. And Tom Martin, who's one of the original three that started this appreciation for this history that we have and these specimens we have, and still contributes when we reach out to him. Fine gentleman. Our new treasure tree program, it's on the Tree Charlotte website, as it should be, has the history of the program, the registry of all the original trees. You can nominate a tree. And that is, let me just say a little bit, that's we are taking nominations, but we are working on a process to process those nominations. So it's not we're not a for-profit, and we work at our own pace, so to speak. We have self-guided tours available on the website that you can do while walking. I guide bike tours. You can do them yourself, or you can drive to these different locations. And then Brett has several stories that he elaborates on, like the one about the bog tree, that just, you really get a sense of adventure if you can be adventure to go up and meet a tree. I mean, it doesn't say anything, but finding these things is just, it's a thrill. You're not jumping up and down screaming, but honestly, you're so humbled. And so what are we up to now? Well, we're installing new tags that have QR codes that take you, so you can be out walking and seeing these different trees. Take your phone, put it on the QR tag, it'll take you to that page for that tree. It'll give you as much information as we currently have about it. That may be just information about those measurements, which are not, that's where our starting point is, but if it's a cool tree, we want it on the list. And then we're visiting nominated trees to perform measurements, capture photos, and see if we need to bring in the state to get those nominated for state or national champs, which Brett has just gone through the process.
And here's a couple of examples of some of the new tags that we put on some of the original trees from the original list. You can see that, we did a combination of the original tag that was actually designed by Joe McLaren on his old Mac back in the 1980s. These are metal tags, and it took me a long time before I realized, when I was looking at the ones that are still hanging on some of the trees around here, that it has a stamped number on it. And that stamped number correlates with the number of that tree out of the 1 through 123 on the original list. But as Patrick said, the beauty of this now is you can just go up there and hover your phone camera right over this QR code, and it'll open up the web page so you can read about that tree. And there's the Crimean linden in the middle, and one up here in the top right that I just finally got retagged about 2 weeks ago. That's up in the Huntersville area. It's one of the biggest loblolly pines I think I've ever seen. And Patrick's actually done some work on this tree because it was, as you can see in that photo, it withstood a lightning strike several years ago. And Patrick went out there and talked to the owners and essentially said that if it lives another year, then it's probably going to be okay. And that tree is still doing really, really well up there. So Patrick, kind of explain a little bit about why we're doing this, about the environmental impacts of this.
Yeah, so, and I will admit right away that the environmental impacts are probably the best metric we can do for most people to put reason to why we do it. But the truth is that we're just in awe that these giant organisms that populate this earth, we get up close to and we learn about. And It's not just the environmental, but it's everything else that's with it. And what you find is as trees get old, like a lot of these trees are, and they start to disintegrate to a degree, they're actually putting back into the environment around them. So as they die, as dead wood forms on them, they become wildlife habitat and they become food for those, for everything that's in that ecosystem. Birds, insects, mammals, they are the home. They're the cornerstone of the natural world in the Charlotte area. So we know people like me who spend their life, and I've been in Charlotte since I was 4 and I'm 66 now. And I spend my time driving around and looking up, and I'm finding these big holes in the canopy. And I haven't in the past seen us make this commitment to replace it because it's so simple if we're just deliberate about it to maintain and actually grow our habitat. So they show loss. Last one publicized, I think it was 2018. We're at 45%. I can tell you, we're not at 45% anymore. If you've seen the construction going on in this town, we're not even close. And 42% is a long ways away. There's hundreds of acres that go into each one of those points. So let's get with it. Let's plant some trees, individually plant some trees. And as a society, our trees make Charlotte what it is. Everyone that comes here, that's the first thing they say. And we can own that and we can grow that going forward. So that's a part of the Treasure Tree program is meant to recognize, but also to inspire. So if you're going to do good in your life, you don't need to have a political agenda to plant a tree. It's loving the earth. It's loving your home.
One of the things that Beth asked Patrick and I to do is to give some good recommendations on some other places across the state to explore outside of Mecklenburg County, because there's a lot of people who join these meetings and all across the state. So the first one I'm going to point out is out in Marvin in a development out there is a willow oak, which I just nominated last year for a national champion and was just recognized around September, October, that is now a national co-champion willow oak. So the forestry agent out there in Union County came out and met me out there, and they performed measurements, and they send everything up through North Carolina Forest Service, sends it to American Forest, and then they recognize it once a year. They announce their new trees. So this willow oak, it's kind of hard to explain this tree. It's a lot like the one that was in the original program in Mecklenburg County that was cut down. This tree is about 30 feet in circumference around the trunk at 4.5 feet off the ground level. And it's kind of hard to even explain that to people. When you see the tree, it looks like a house. It's literally the size of a house, and it's well worth taking a little drive out there to Marvin to take a look at that. Patrick spends a lot of time up in Black Mountain. Asheville for a long time has had a treasured trees program that's partnered with Asheville Greenworks nonprofit. They've got a similar original list in Asheville of trees that they had in their original program, and they're going about the same process of reviving their program and accepting new tree nominations as well. A couple of places I'd like to just give you to check out in the Great Smokies. I was lucky enough several months ago my wife and I met up with Patrick and his wife and drove out into Cataloochee and took him out on the Boogerman Trail. And that is one of the best first growth areas in the park, in my opinion. The tallest tree discovered east of the Mississippi is in that part of the park right there off of that Boogerman Trail in the Cataloochee area. The other one that I would recommend highly checking out over on the Tennessee side is called the Albright Grove. It's a 3.5 mile hike up to a 7/10 of a mile loop that goes through a completely untouched grove up there that's just loaded with eastern hemlocks and poplars. And a lot of those hemlocks over on that side of the park have been treated for the woolly edgelid that's been killing all the hemlocks out through the Smokies. That picture on the right is got to be the biggest hemlock, living, healthy hemlock that I've ever seen. And that tree stands about 10 feet off the trail. And it does have a tag on the back of it from the Park Service that it has been treated for the woolly edgelid to protect against it. Joyce Kilmer Memorial Forest. It's a long way out there, but it's worth every bit of that drive to see that. That forest is a just spectacular stand of poplars. And if you do any kayaking, the Black River Preserve in the eastern part of the state, they discovered the oldest bald cypress in the world in that swamp. And you probably have to have a guide to take you to where that tree is located, but that is a spectacular bald cypress. And then if you want to take a drive down to South Carolina to Congaree, they actually have about 25 state and national champion trees in Congaree, and there's some really good hiking trails in Congaree. Just be aware if you go down there in the summer, they've got mosquitoes the size of airplanes down there. And I threw a couple of pictures in here. This picture is back last summer. My wife and I went out to the Great Smokies and went back to Joyce Kilmer for the first time in almost 20 years. And this is just giving you an idea of the size of some of the poplars in Joyce Kilmer. And the picture on the right is the picture of what's called the Boogerman pine. So this is the tallest tree anywhere east of the Mississippi. And Patrick and I just about walked right past this tree. We had some good details of how to find it. And we walked right past it on the trail and turned around and looked behind us. And if we wouldn't have looked behind us, we would have never seen the tree. And it was about 20 feet off the main trail. So this tree is, it's about 12 feet in circumference around the trunk, and it's 186 feet tall. And the interesting thing about it is it doesn't have any limbs until it gets up to 99 feet in height. And they did a core study of a neighbor tree next to this tree, and they pulled the core out of it to the pith and took it into a laboratory and did the tree ring dating on it, and they got a date of 345 years old. So that gives you some kind of an idea how long a pine tree can grow. It has to be in almost perfect conditions. It has to be in a sort of an area where it's buffered from storms, from wind, because pine trees just get ripped out of the ground in really bad storms, tornadoes, and things like that. But this tree was pretty spectacular, and Patrick and I were really lucky to see this tree. We will have a document that we'll send out with a lot of these links in it. And I've got a list of some really good reading material here that I would just recommend. The one I would highlight on here is the top one. Peter Wolleben is a German forester who wrote a series of 3 books about nature. And the first one is called The Hidden Life of Trees. It's just spectacular read. It's written more in layman's terms so that someone without any kind of scientific background can read this and really understand a lot about the science behind trees. And I would highly recommend that one. The Wild Trees is a good story about Professor Steve Sillett, who's a professor in California who studied redwoods almost his entire life. And reading this book kind of got me interested in going out to California and checking out the redwoods out there. And I'm sure that a lot of you are probably familiar with the last 2 are really good field guides. The last one is a textbook on trees and all types of landscape plants. Michael Durr has written different volumes of this. I think it's up to the 9th edition, but that is a big, big book if you really want to get into the details about trees. And that's all we have. We do have a good bit of time here. We have about 10 minutes or so that we can take a look at some questions. Beth, do you want to kind of give us some of the questions that have come in, or?
Sure. And thank you both. There were some questions about tree age, if you consider that as a metric when you're uh, evaluating trees, or how does that factor in?
So it's not a measure that is quantitative in the manner of height or spread or circumference. It is, and it's an imperfect system. There's no question of that. It's more a matter of us seeing how a tree does on its spot, but it is not used in calculation for any of these lists at this point in time.
Yeah, and there are some formulas. The only true way to find out the age of the tree is to take the core sample out of it. But there are some formulas that Trees Charlotte has published on its website. If you capture the diameter of the tree, there's a formula that gives you a multiplier based on what type of tree, if it's a white oak or a red oak. There's a 6 or 8 different trees you can use with this formula to get sort of a rough estimate of age. But the only true way of doing that is to do the core sample and do the tree ring dating. And we're not doing anything like that as part of this program.
Gotcha.
Right. What you're going to find on those trees in the forest that grow very upright and don't have limbs till you get high, they'll have very tight rings, so they can be 2 feet in diameter and over 100 years old. Whereas trees that grow up out in the open, they get sunlight all day long, and all around them they build these wide spreading crowns. They can be 3 feet in diameter and only 80 years old. So it really is, age is a very subjective in relation to size based on the location that it's growing and the resources available.
Here's another question. When you're working with these trees and evaluating them and all of that, do any of the specimens, do you talk about any of them being a mother tree?
Not really. A mother tree is more of a phenomenon, and you see it particularly with magnolias, where the limbs drop down to the ground and they'll root from there. And so the mother tree will be in the center, and in time, all her babies will force her out. It's more of a concept and an observation than, of course, and depending on your interpretation, there are mother trees that seed whole areas. But from a form standpoint, it's a very unique, and I've only seen it about 7 times in my life, where you have one stem in the middle and all these little ones coming up around it. It's really wonderful to walk into, because it's almost being like in a little room itself.
Yeah, I will say that there is a good example of that at Bartlett Arboretum of their coast redwood. So their original coast redwood out there was a single stem coast redwood, and it was really struggling because it was growing out in the open. So it was just getting beaten up by heat and sun every summer. So the original tree in the middle died, and then a couple of years later, they got 4 new saplings that grew up around the base of that trunk, which is in California. When you go see the big ones out there, that's called a cathedral tree, where the mother in the center dies out and the seedlings grow up around the trunk and then become this beautiful cathedral. So that redwood out there now is 4 stem redwood that are growing out of the original trunk.
Is viewing the trees in the Bartlett Arboretum, is that open to the public?
No, it's not. And it took me almost a year to get somebody to agree to let me come out there and take me around on a guided tour. What I would recommend, Beth, is to see if you can get in touch with someone. There is somebody I can give you a name out there. Depending on how things are going with the COVID restrictions, it would be well worth getting a tour of that property, because it's a living science museum of trees out there. It is really amazing to see all the different types of trees they have on that property. And there are 2 original treasure trees on the property out there, 3 maybe. I think there's 3, but you do have to get permission, and you just do have to get a guided tour out there.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, please pass that along to us. We had another question about when you tag the tree, and I assume you're nailing it in or affixing it in some way, how does the tag affect the growth of the tree, or does the tree grow around it, or how does that work?
That's a great question, because some of the original tags have literally been swallowed by the tree. So if a great example is go over to the ginkgo in front of the Harris Admissions Building at Queen's University, and that ginkgo in 20 years consumed 90% of the tag, so that you can see the tips of the tag sticking out of the trunk right now, so that it folded it in half and swallowed it into the trunk as the tree got bigger, as the trunk got bigger. So, you know, one of the things that I'm doing with the new tags is that there's just another way of doing it is to mount the tag off of the trunk about an inch and put springs behind the tag, which allows it to give it some more room for growth, so that it won't so quickly in the next 10 years swallow the tag. And I'll use aluminum nails. So, you know, the thing you don't want to do with nails and things like that in trees is just to pull them out and leave the hole exposed, because at that point you're endangering some sort of a boring insect to get in there into the cambium and start working its way into the tree.
Interesting. So I know that you talked about it a little bit, but if you could kind of repeat the process, if anybody on the call today or the Zoom meeting today is just so inspired to participate with you in looking at or evaluating trees that they know about that you may not be aware of yet, how do we participate in nominating or finding or get involved with you?
Yeah, I would recommend looking at the webpage we have for nominating new trees. We have a lot of information on there about some of the tree species that were on the original list that we do not have any of those trees anymore. We're looking for new ones to fill in that gap. You know, not everybody's going to have the materials to get the measurements, but we're really kind of looking for rough estimates just for the numbers. You don't have to give us like a really specific crown spread measurement. If you just measure the trunk with a tape measure, that's a really good starting point, and then you can estimate the other things. But one of the really important things is tell us a story. If you know about a really good story about a tree that was on a property you're living on that was there, that was planted in the 1920s or something like that, that's a great story that we want to hear, and that's the kind of trees we want to look for adding to the program. But everything is contained on the Trees Charlotte website on the web pages about, you know, what we're looking for new trees, and you can fill out the form online. It's just a simple Google form, and within a couple of weeks we should have a group of volunteers that go out and measure and check out these trees and take pictures of them. And then the core committee, Patrick and I and a couple of others, will go review these at some point, and then we're going to announce probably towards the end of the summer. We hope that we can announce a new set of trees we're going to be adding to the program at that point.
That's exciting. And that on the Tree Charlotte website is where the list and locations of the ones that you've recognized so far. And
That's
so
right.
Geographically, what area are you concentrating your efforts on? Just Mecklenburg County or beyond that?
Yeah, we're really focusing on Mecklenburg County. That is one thing we're keeping the program inside the county in Mecklenburg. Chris Chow went to Davidson, and part of what he's doing up there is he started a new treasure tree program in Davidson as part of his college studies program. So we would like to, you know, kind of at least keep with that original plan of the original program to keep this particular program as part of the Mecklenburg County area. And there are a couple of other treasure tree type programs in other areas of the state. Like I know that there is one somewhere in Winston-Salem, and there's one somewhere on the coastal areas of the state as well.
And I posted many of the links that you offered us that you mentioned in your talk in the chat. So if anybody was interested in any of those links, they're in the chat, and then we will follow up also with an email after we get the video posted with a lot of those links. I don't see any other new questions, if anybody else has any other questions while we're offering some closing comments. Once again, we're grateful to UNC Charlotte for co-hosting the meeting with us today. And if you haven't been up to tour their gardens, both the Van Landingham Glen and the Susie Harwood Garden, the Mellichamp Native Terrace is coming into full bloom now and is very sunny. So we highly encourage. It's a open to the public at no charge and wonderful place to visit. So we encourage that very much. They are in the process of developing their list of fall classes. So keep an eye out on their website, I think it's gardens.unc.edu, uncc.edu. Check out their classes that are coming up. And Mary asked me to announce that their newest garden at the in the Van Landingham Glen is opening on May 22nd. And that garden is a sensory and memorial garden to Polly Rogers. And it's going to be it's been in development for about the last year and a half, but it will be unveiled and opened on May 22nd. Check out the website for more information, but it's a beautiful sensory garden for children and adults of all ages, and just a wonderful place to explore. So we encourage you to check that out. And let's see if there were any other questions. Oh, we were gonna post, if you're new to gardening or working in your home garden, we have 2 books that we recommend and that you can buy through UNC Charlotte, written by Dr. Larry Mellichamp. The first is the Southeast Native Plant Primer, and that can be purchased through the UNC Charlotte Botanical Garden. And then the newer book, the latest book, is the primer, written with Paula Gross and Dr. Mellichamp together. And the book prior to that, which is a kind of more extensive review of native plants of the Southeast by Dr. Mellichamp. And both of these books are available through the Botanical Garden. So if you would like to order those, it's a great way to learn about your own garden. I'd like to take a moment to thank our recent volunteers for supporting the efforts of the Southern Piedmont Chapter. We participated in an installation at Barton Creek Greenway with UNC Charlotte Botanical Gardens and planted a meadow there, and that was quite a bit of fun for those of us who were able to join, and something that we can all watch grow over the years at Barton Creek Greenway, which is in University area. And we also had several members participate at an information table at the Belmont Living History Day. And we are thankful for those people who participated and shared our message with the community. We have a few more volunteer opportunities coming up. We've been invited to have a table with Carolina Thread Trail at their Trails Day, which I believe is June 5th. And again, that's always a great audience, a wonderful way to be a part of the community and to educate people. And we'll have that posted, I believe, on Facebook about how you can volunteer with that opportunity. So we thank you to our members for supporting our efforts to reach out to the public and educate them on native plants. Brett and Patrick, I don't see any new questions, but thank you so much for these stories. It was just truly just wonderful to hear a celebration of trees and champion trees and how you found them. And so we enjoyed it very much. And I assume that if people have further questions, they can get in touch with you via the Tree Charlotte website. Your contact information is on there. Is that true?
That's right. Yes.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us and participating with us today. And Brett and Patrick, thank you both for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. We'll say so long for now and go enjoy this beautiful weather, everyone. Thank you.